Welcome back, and today I'm excited to be interviewing Dr. Jim Salvucci. I am taking the time to pronounce the name. That's how challenging it is for me. I am excited to be interviewing this amazing human being because the last time I talked to him, I thought he had a very good way he challenged traditional leadership and who is a leader, who is not. I have never understood why some people are bad leaders and other people just feel like they are good leaders. I've never understood why some people were like the people's person. And so now I reflect back in my job and I'm saying, those people I really didn't like because I felt like they were the boss and they wanted to rule me and manage me. But there's also people that I felt inspired me, encouraged me, and challenged me to be better. And when I talked to this gentleman, I felt like there is a distinction between being a boss and being a leader. And the work he really does is help people define, I think, leadership as the person they become, not the title or the trophy on their head. And I love how he's thinking because really what makes one a leader is not the stamp, but what they have become that can transform and inspire another human being. I want to bring him on because I want him to kind of really explain what he does, how he does it, and why I think it's really unique, because I think it's unique. I haven't seen anyone that taught leadership the way that Jim does. And that was interesting enough for me to want to have him on the show. Let me see. What did I leave out? I know I haven't read the bio, but that's an intention. Like, what did I leave out that you feel is very key to the work you do and how you do it? Meanwhile,
Well,
welcome to the podcast. Like, thank you for saying yes and for coming on. Before I start putting you on the hot seat, welcome to the podcast.
thank you for having me, Prima. I appreciate it. So I spent 30 years in higher education as a professor. I was an English professor, and then I was a dean and I was a provost at several universities in the US.
Mm.
So my background's pretty extensive, and that's how I got into leadership. When I became a dean, I realized I better up my leadership game. I had been a leader my whole life. Starting when I was a kid in Boy Scouts, I was thrust into leadership positions way before my time. I was a boss at 18. I had employees. So throughout my life, when I was a student, I was a leader. And when I became a faculty member at a university outside of Baltimore in Maryland, I became a faculty leader. And I was asked then to become the dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, which was really cool, except there was no School of Humanities and Social Sciences, so I had to found it. And when I founded it, I realized that all the leadership I'd done in the past was what I call gut leadership. It was intuitive, right? I was good at it, but I never really thought about it. I just did it. And now the stakes were way higher. So I had to really think about leadership, and I really had to learn about leadership. Naturally what you do is you look to the people above you, your bosses, right? And so I looked to the president of the university and the provost, who were my bosses, and they were atrocious leaders. So I had no help there. They weren't mentoring me. There was nothing. It was the opposite. They gave us leadership training that was just ridiculous. So I realized I wasn't getting help there. I looked at my peers, my fellow deans. They had no idea what they were doing. They were just flailing around. I imitated them for a while. That was a disaster. I started slipping into micromanagement, perfectionism, all the things I abhor. I was overworked. It just didn't make sense. And then one day I caught myself. My first year as a dean, I went to a meeting and I had to dismiss myself early from the meeting. And I said, I have to go put out a fire. And everybody in the meeting's like, oh, yes, she has to put out a fire. How important. Yes, 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 yes. And I wandered off, walking across campus to my office. And I thought, so what's this fire I got to put out? I'm all important. I had to make a phone call. That was the fire. And I realized I've been talking about what I was doing like this. Everything was a crisis. And all the people around me are always in crisis. Their hair was on fire all the time. Every little thing was a disaster.
Mm.
And I realized that if everything's a crisis, nothing's a crisis. You can't prioritize. You can't think things through. And when a real crisis comes, and it doesn't happen very often, but when a true crisis turns up, you don't know how to deal with it. You have no concept because you're on full all the time and nothing left, right? So it doesn't go to 11, as they say. So I was, I realized there's something's got to change. So I started thinking about leadership in a different way. I started studying leadership. I started reading books. I started going to trainings, good trainings. I received certifications. I have a certification from Harvard for leadership training, on and on and on. Did all these things, started applying what I learned from my many mistakes because I made mistakes. I'm very much an empiricist. I try things out and see what works. I do experiments. I learn from them. I also learned the magic of what I call learning from the negative paradigm, where you look at what other people are doing, you look at where they drop the ball, where they fail, and learn from their mistakes. Or you look at systems that aren't working and learn how to make better systems. So this is learning from the negative paradigm. I did that for a few years, then moved on, became a provost myself at a couple institutions, applied what I was learning, and then I left higher ed altogether back in 2020 and decided that what I really wanted to do was help people become better leaders, particularly young managers. And that's what I do now through coaching, speaking, and writing.
Wow. So in your own experience, what type of person could use this as oxygen? What type of manager? I know you say the younger managers, but what is the mindset of this person that this is like the fresh air they're looking to breathe, but they don't even know that it's there? How do we describe this person that we want to talk to? But because I want to empower the listener to say, oh my God, I know this person. How can we describe them in a way that they can transfer the message or transmit the message by just helping them know like which kind of manager is going to find this life-changing for them?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. First off, I don't care about industry. I'm industry agnostic. It doesn't matter. Leadership is leadership, right? It just is. There's some variations on it, like the military and all, where it takes a little bit of a different form, but leadership ultimately is leadership. As you said, I do make a strict distinction between bosses and leaders. Most bosses are not leaders, and even fewer are great leaders. But there's many, many leaders, even great leaders, who will never be a boss. Those terms have nothing to do with each other. So when I talk about bosses, that's generally a negative term. When I talk about leaders, that's generally a positive term. I've had a lot of bosses and very, very, very few leaders in my time overseeing me. So that's key to understanding what I do. In terms of who I work with people who are much like I was when I became a dean. They're looking around. They don't have the proper training. They don't have the proper models. They don't have anyone to look to. They're not getting mentored. They're not getting guidance. No one's helping them, but they know there's got to be a better way. They don't want to be just like their old bosses. And most people, that's exactly what they do. No matter how much they detested their old boss, they act exactly like their old boss because they don't really have any other models. So I'm looking for the people who get it, who get that there is a better way. And it takes work and it takes sacrifice and it takes risk and it takes guts and it takes strength and it takes resilience. It takes all those things. So I'm looking for people who are willing to do that. And there's lots of people like that.
People who are looking to be leaders, but outside the box, outside the traditional setting. You see the leadership you've been indoctrinated in, and it's not enough. You feel like there's another way, there's a better way. There has to be a better way to support whoever you're supporting with your leadership. If you feel like the boss model is not the model for you, but you find yourself in the model, this is the type of person we are speaking to on this episode today. You don't fit in the boss model and you don't want to be a duplicate of your boss. And you kind of want find another way to be a leader and to get to whatever the thing that you're trying to get to. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, that's very good. And you know, if you get home at the end of the day after a day of managing and you're relieved to become who you really are because you're no longer at work, there's something wrong. You should be who you are everywhere, right? And that means you've probably gone into bossing mode. And that's where I was. When I started imitating my peers, I would go home at the end of the day and I'd revert to who I really am. And then I realized, no. I need to be who I really am when I'm leading.
So you feel like they have a manufactured character when they go to work and they are someone else at home. And what's the problem with that mindset or that way of being?
Well, part of it is integrity, right? So I always say there's to be a leader, you need integrity. You need character, and integrity is a big part of that. And integrity has really three elements. And the simplest way to think about it is think about physical integrity. So picture a chair, a solid object. If we say a chair has integrity, we know three things about it. One is that it's solid, right? It's not liquid, it's not gaseous, it's solid, it's real, it's there. You can touch it. The second is that it's whole. It's not missing anything. There isn't a leg missing. There isn't a bolt missing, right? It's not going to fall apart. It's not going to fall over. And the third thing has to do with that second thing. It's reliable, right? You can sit on a chair. So if you walk in a room and you see a chair and it's not falling over and it looks solid, you know you can sit on it, right? You can sit down and be comfortable. It's reliable. It's the same thing with human integrity or moral integrity, if you want to think of it that way. When you have integrity, it has to be solid. You have to have solid, clear values. It has to be whole. You can't, and this is where going home and being different comes in. You can't go home and have integrity with your family, but not have that same integrity at work. You can't have integrity at one aspect of your job and not another. You can't be really, really good at, filling out reports, but you like to fudge the budget, right? It's got to be complete. It's got to be universal. It's got to be everywhere. That makes it whole. And then finally, you need to be reliable. People have to be able to look at you and say, that is somebody I can trust, because trust is key to leadership.
When we last had the conversation, you said something that was interesting, and you said bosses are not necessarily great leaders. And I wonder if you'd like to talk more to the damage that being in the boss sphere or boss mentality or boss trajectory or I don't know, roller coaster can cause to you and those around you. If you'd like to speak to that, because I felt like that was a good angle you had there.
Okay, I'll go even further. If you're a manager and you're a boss, not a leader, you are incompetent. You are incompetent. The job of every single manager, if you're managing people, your job, your number one job is to get them to do their jobs well. If you're a boss, you're undermining that. If you're a bully, if you yell, forget it. I'd say, there's a special place in hell for people who yell or for bosses who yell. There's no excuse. Unless the building's on fire and you need to get people out, you do not yell. If you don't treat people with trust, they don't trust you, you don't trust them. If you're passive aggressive, if you're a micromanager, if you're a perfectionist, if you're a control freak, all these things undermine your people. That's what bosses do. All those things are antithetical to what a manager does, right? So you're not competent. Your job description is literally make your people better, and you're not. Therefore, you're incompetent. So that's some of the damage they do. But the damage is vast. The bullying, the gaslighting, this stuff affects people in their entire lives. They feel stress. They feel sick. They go home. They carry it into their families. They carry it into their communities. That's on you. That's on you. If you make people miserable, they carry that misery everywhere. If you make people feel good, they carry that goodness everywhere. A leader makes people feel like they belong, like they're important, like they're engaged, that they're inspired. You want to have people like that in your community. You want to have them in your family. So why not have them at your job?
Wow. You've done this for 30 years. Going back in time and 30 years from like before today, if you had the magic wand, what would you change about the way leadership is being conducted today?
Um, well, you know, it's as it always is. Youth is wasted on the young.
Mm,
I wish I knew then what I know now.
mm,
Um, but I think, yeah, we're kind of stuck in this mode
mm,
in our society, and I mean worldwide,
mm,
where we think of bosses
mm,
as being absolute. You have to knuckle under. You have to
mm,
give in. I was always very bad at that. I didn't like giving in. I didn't
mm,
like just doing what I was told. And I got myself in a lot of trouble because of it.
mm,
And so one of the things we have to recognize is that it's really, really important to, when if you're a leader, to understand that when people aren't conforming, there's usually a reason. And you need to figure it out. And it could be they're jerks. It could be they're insubordinate. It could be a number of things that you have to deal with that are negative. But very often it's because they're not responding to your leadership and there's something you can adjust. And I wish I really understood that way back when I was first
mm.
starting out. And like I said, I've been in leadership positions far longer than 30 years. I was just in higher ed for 30 years and I've had a couple different careers. But yeah, so I'm old. So but I'm, you know, and I'm still learning.
Mm. Wow. When I listen to you, every time I listen to you, I go, okay, your work is for managers, but I think that your work can be utilized by parents, it can be utilized by entrepreneurs, it can be utilized by anyone that is responsible for another human being. But I don't want to make a blanket statement. What would you say about that? The diversity of these principles you teach and how far they can go for people.
Yeah, this is something I've struggled with because
Mm.
there's all kinds of leadership gurus out there. And I don't want to be a leadership guru because I think most of that's nonsense. But there's all kinds of leadership gurus out there. There's all kinds of advice and books and this. I'm working on a book right now. I'm
Mm.
working on a TEDx talk right now. I'm
Mm.
doing all these different things to get my stuff out there. And there's lots of people who do this. And
Mm.
some of it's good, some of it's bad, and some of it's kind of whatever. Most of it's
Mm.
whatever.
Mm.
Um, and so leadership is this very popular topic now. And
Mm.
I'm kind of in the noise with everyone else. And I'm trying to find my voice with,
Mm.
you know, so I stand out a little bit. And I think my approach is quite different than most people's.
Mm.
But one of the reasons leadership is so common, a topic, so popular,
Mm.
is precisely because it is so broad.
Mm.
It's really about, and I'm a former academic, so here we go, philosophy. I'm a philosopher of leadership. That's what I do. I think about leadership, and leadership is applicable. The rules are applicable to pretty much every part of your life, right?
Mm.
Like I said, you have to have integrity across your entire life. And yeah, it works for parents, right? It works for every, you know, if you're a leader in your community and your school, whatever it is, it isn't just about bossing. That's just who I work with. It's not just about managers and businesses. It's everything involved in life. One of my core principles
Mm.
for leadership is you start with character. And I said that
Mm.
before.
Mm.
Character is key. And that has to do with human decency. People often say to me, give me just one leadership rule. And I always say, well, I'll put it in the positive and I'll put it in the negative. The first one is be decent. The
Mm.
second one is don't be a jerk. They mean the same thing, basically, right? But, you know, you start with character. Every aspect of your life has to do with character. If you are a good person, I don't mean you think you're a good person or you do, you know, you go do some charity work every weekend or something like that. I mean, you're actually a good person in your life.
Mm.
You have core values that are solid that you live up to. You don't apply them here and don't apply them there. Then you can be a great leader in any aspect of your life, including your home life.
Mm. Mm. Oh, for you now that you've touched on character, I'd like for you to share the process with us from being in the boss mentality. I think really the person that is going to find this helpful is the person that does not love the way traditional leadership was positioned to be, the person that wants to challenge status quo, the person that doesn't want to duplicate whoever footsteps they're stepping in. If you like the out of the box way of doing things and you see yourself in leadership and you're like, I really don't want to do this the way everybody has done it, then this is going to be like, I think it's more of out of the box thinkers, people who've now understood that they can challenge patterns and programming, and we don't have to do what our grandparents did. I think this is the person who's going to find this helpful. I'd love to share the process that it takes to move from I'm just a leader because that's what I found. But when I look up, my boss doesn't seem to be helping me. When I look down, I look weak. And so I am kind of in this place where I'm supposed to figure it out, and I actually don't know how to figure it out. So if you would take us through that process, what would that look like between that process of darkness to a place where they actually know what to do that doesn't look like anything around them?
Yeah. So first off, I think I appeal most to outside the box thinkers, but everything I say, anybody can do, period. Right. It takes a little guts to be a leader. It does. It takes some fortitude, like I said before. It takes resilience, but anybody can do this stuff. It's so basic. One of the challenges, I think, in the leadership thinking community is, like I said, we have all these gurus and they love to churn out rules. Here's how to be, here's how not to be, right? Rule after rule, 21 rules of this, 36 that, whatever. And it's overwhelming. And, these rules are fine. They're all good. I don't disagree with anything they're saying. It's wonderful. But it's impossible for people to even grasp. The human mind can only handle 4 ideas at a time. Okay. Except on very rare occasions with very special people. 4 ideas. This has been studied. This is the conclusion. 4 ideas. There was a study out of the University of Oregon that I often cite that talked about this exactly. And one of the interesting things is it doesn't matter whether those ideas are simple or complex. So it has nothing to do with complexity. It's literally the number 4. So they could be 4 simple ideas, just memorize 4 things and you can keep them in your head at the same time. Or they could be 4 incredibly complex things, but once you learn them, you can also keep them in your head at the same time. So I've come up with a way of thinking about leadership that is just done in 4s, and I call it the 4 C's of leadership. And the first one, as we talked about, is character. And I've already described that. That's your personality, it's your values, it's your integrity. It's also, and this is key, your behavior. How you act. It's, I'm good at, if you say, I'm good inside, well, that's not good enough. You've got to actually put things into action, right? You've got to behave well. So that's what constitutes your character. And that involves self-awareness. Every leader needs to start with self-awareness. You need to think about who you are, what your values are, and how you behave. That will build your character. Once you've established your character, you can work on the next C, which is communication. Communication is absolutely critical to leadership. Obviously, you need to communicate both ways. That's listening and speaking, right? Or conveying messages. In terms of conveying messages, that message has to be valuable to people. It has to have value. How does it have value? Well, if you have character, your message will have value. And I always use the example of the boy who cried wolf, the story of the little boy who yells, who's supposed to be watching the sheep and yells to the villagers just for fun, there's a wolf, and everybody comes running and there's no wolf, and he laughs at him. He does it 2 days in a row. On the 3rd day, an actual wolf shows up. He yells, there's a wolf. And no one comes to help him. Why not? Because they realize he has no character. He's a jerk. They don't want to be fooled by him again. So his message has no value. Right? So you can see how character affects the value of the message. And you also need, with a message, and this seems so obvious, but people somehow overlook it. You need to have a known and receptive audience. If
mm,
you're speaking to no one, or you're just speaking to people who don't care or don't understand what you're saying,
mm,
there's no point. So you need to make sure you have some connection with your audience. That's not always 100% possible. Like, I don't know who's listening to this podcast right now.
mm,
I'm trying to be as clear as I can, but I imagine if somebody is listening to the podcast at this point, they're interested and they're engaged to some extent, and
mm,
therefore they're receiving my message. Or at least
mm,
receptive to it. And the third is clarity.
mm,
You need to have clarity. If your message isn't clear, it doesn't really matter how wonderful the message is, how receptive your audience is, it's irrelevant.
mm,
And that's another thing that people often overlook. If you've
mm.
ever had a boss who sends you emails and you have to spend an hour trying to figure out what they meant, that's not a clear message, right? And they just
Mm,
wasted your time. And they
mm,
usually did it in order to save time themselves, but then they imposed all that extra time on you.
mm,
If they'd taken 2 more seconds to write a clear message, then it would have saved you all kinds of trouble. That is the power of clarity. And clarity trumps everything. That is the most
mm,
important aspect of communication.
mm,
Once you can communicate and you see the relationship between communication and character, once you can communicate, then you can work on compromise.
mm,
Compromise is a give and take. It's very transactional.
mm,
I give a little, I take a little. If
mm,
one side is just taking and the other side is just giving, that is not compromise. That's charity. Okay.
mm,
We are, compromise. You have to give something up. It doesn't mean you meet halfway. Sometimes you meet halfway. Sometimes one person goes 1% and the other one goes 99%. But you're
mm,
giving up something and you're taking something.
mm,
That requires communication. That also requires character. If people
mm,
don't trust your character, they're not going to compromise with you.
mm,
Finally, there is, hold on 1 sec. Allergies are killing me. Finally, once you can compromise, we can move on to collaboration.
mm,
Collaboration is really ultimately what leaders do. They get people to work on projects together. They
mm,
get people to work with projects with them. They get things done together. One of my favorite leadership descriptions is from Dwight Eisenhower, and he
mm,
said that leaders get people to get things done because they want to do them. Leaders
mm,
inspire people to do things, to do the right thing. That's collaboration. Collaboration is very different from compromise in that it is not transactional at all. It
mm,
is win-win. In fact, a lot of times in the workplace, we think a good way to motivate people is through competition. That's the
mm,
opposite of collaboration. Ultimately, competition's a zero-sum game. Somebody wins,
mm,
somebody loses,
mm,
right? So collaboration is win-win. We all win in order to reach a certain goal. That when you can do that effectively, you build a
mm,
collaborative environment with your people, then you have trust, you've built off your character, you're
mm,
communicating, you've struck compromises, and now you're working together. That's where leadership really. Those
mm.
are the 4 C's of leadership.
I want to reflect you back what I have because I feel like I have five, and you said there are four, so I want to reflect back so you can tell me where I'm off. The first one was character, which includes your behavior.
Mhm.
There's communication, which is like a clear message to a clear audience. There's clarity. So maybe that's the clarity brings communication. Maybe that's one point. But I have clarity and I have compromise and then I have collaboration. There must be some 2 C's that I have split which need to be together, maybe. Is it communication and clarity?
Clarity and communication are together. So clarity is just
Same
an
thing.
aspect of communication. You
Mm,
need to have the message, the known and receptive audience,
mm.
and the clarity in order to be a good communicator.
It's 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 important that I talk about that because a lot of speakers when they come in and they have a message and they're trying to get on a bigger stage, my thing is more like if you're not clear of your message, if you're not clear of the audience, it doesn't matter how big the stage is. We will be wasting time trying to speak to people. And
Mhm.
to your statement before, who is listening is a person that feels calls for more. They feel called to more. They feel called to do more. Maybe they feel called to lead. but they're lost in the how, maybe because they don't like how everyone is leading. And so they are lost in the how. So they're coming on this podcast because there's a lot of experts who hold the how in their soul. So the person on the other side is a person that feels called to do more, but they are lost somewhere. Like, okay, I have this piece, but I don't have this piece. So how do I actually step into this thing which I feel called to do when I don't have all the pieces? So they kind of come here to piece it all together. So just for your own comfort, everyone that is listening to you is qualified, because in one way, shape, or the other, they are a leader in their own capacity. I wanted to pivot a little bit and go to what do you call it, payoffs? I can see this process. I totally like the process. That's because probably I'm always just looking to challenge status quo. And the listener feels the same, is in the same kind of mind. But what can you point to as the payoffs or the aftermath of going through this mindset of I might be a boss or will have a trophy over there or whatever the badge is, but ultimately I want to be the person that deserves to be called a leader? What have you seen to be like the massive payoffs that come with this supposedly simple, but I personally know that the simplest things are the hardest to do, because if I look like in the world, everyone knows how to lose weight. Everyone can find out how to lose weight. It's not logic science. But when I look around, it's a serious problem, which means the simplest things are always known the easiest to do. So I would love for you to kind of take us to the payoffs. What is the payoffs that could happen when people actually take the simple things seriously and actually go this route?
Yeah. I often say leadership concepts are incredibly easy to grasp and incredibly hard to implement and sustain. Okay. Like anything that's worth doing, it's a constant challenge. You're constantly adjusting. Something that works today won't work tomorrow. Your values might change. Things will happen. So you need to be prepared for that. And that is constant self-improvement when you are a leader. But that should be life. Lifelong learning is a wonderful thing. Constant self-improvement is a wonderful thing. You know, you're never going to achieve perfection and you shouldn't even strive for it. But self-improvement, absolutely. Right? You can do that. So that's part of it. The payoffs are, there's a number of them. One is just the intrinsic, the internal payoff, which is you are comfortable with yourself. I've been in situations where I was true to my values and I paid a very, very high price for that. And I would do that again, because in the end, as difficult as that was, I was true to me, and I can be proud of that. Right? That's something that I can bank on. And maybe nobody else even knew, but I was true to me. Now, that's one payoff. Another is if you're in charge of a workplace, you're going to get more productivity out of people. You just will. Right? Now, you might have some people who don't fit in, who don't work hard, whatever. There's things going on. They have challenges of their own, whatever it is. But by and large, you're going to have a much healthier workplace and create a much healthier culture. And finally, that productivity will lead to more success. I'm right now writing on the topic of legacy. I write a weekly essay and I'm working on a book, and I'm writing on the topic of legacy and leadership. And you would think what I'm saying is, leaders, I'm basically describing a humble leader. Why would you think about legacy? What I leave behind if you're humble? Well, if a leader's doing their job, they leave behind a strong legacy just by chance, right? It's just the way it is. One of those legacies has to do with cultures and systems, right? They leave in place the systems that function and healthy cultures. And the more important legacy is leaders beget other leaders. If you're a leader, a true leader, one of your imperatives is to make sure your people can become great leaders as well. And so you do that through modeling your behavior. They see you in operation by teaching them, mentoring, coaching, doing trainings, making sure you're bringing new leaders up. And then if they in turn become great leaders, guess what they do? They do the same thing. This is how we change the world. This is my mission, to train younger people to become great leaders so that they can train more great leaders, and so on and so on. Compound interest. This is how we change the world.
I love it. And to your point, I think living a double life is exhausting. I remember when I was in employment, we used to have bosses that were super casual, super excited, super easy to get along with. But then we had these company days where you could bring your wife along, and their wife came. And for that entire time, we saw someone that was like, what happened to this guy? He had like, I think, a personality at home and a personality at, and he wasn't even like a boss at work. He was like more pleasant, more welcome, more interested. And then the wife showed up and was like, it's still part of like, what? Who is this person? And to your point, it's exhausting to just try and be a different person in a different situation. I just think your methodology allows people to just be them, so they don't have to remember who they are when they reach another place. I don't know how that is bouncing off for you, but that's kind of how I'm feeling it. That you don't have to live a double life or be someone you're not sometimes just to fit in that place.
Yeah. It's more honest. You're more honest with yourself. And when you're more honest with yourself, you're more comfortable with yourself. So, you know, we all code switch in different situations. You talk one way with your friends, and you talk a different way with your parents, and you talk with this one and that one, you know, and that's fine. There's changes, but the fundamentals, the values, the behaviors, the things you do, the way you act. And I'm very big on behavior, because we often think that you have to have these pure thoughts. None of us have pure thoughts, right? We all think good things and horrible things we don't want any other human being to know we ever thought. We all do that. The difference between good people and not good people is good people don't act on them.
Good people are just who they are. And they have no need to be somebody they are. They don't even need to remember what they said the last time, because they're always just speaking the truth. Wow. What is the part that we left out that you feel would be very crucial for the person on this journey of wanting to be a true leader that is true to themselves and not wanting to be in the boss model? What is the piece that you feel they should grab from this podcast that we haven't touched yet?
What haven't we touched? I think we've touched on so much here, Prima. I don't know. But I think it's that sort of overarching idea, right? It really is an ongoing, intentional effort to be a leader. You can be a gut leader like I was, and that's fine. That'll only take you so far. You'll never be able to scale that up. You'll never be able to sustain that for a long period of time. Leadership is something you need to just constantly think about and work on and apply. You need to get feedback. Communication's so key here. You need to be able, and communication isn't just speaking and writing. It's also observing. How do people react? That's a form of communication. If people are in a meeting and they're kind of rolling their eyes, they're communicating. Right? And you need to think, what's going on here? So it's this constant need to improve, to assess, to reassess, right? To think about, what am I doing that's working? What am I doing that isn't? There's always going to be something that can be improved. And that's hard. And that sounds daunting. But the beauty of it is, this is really how we should be living our lives, right? We should be trying to improve. People are listening to this podcast, not because we're so entertaining, but because they're trying to learn something. That's improvement. That's self-improvement. You're doing it right now if you're listening to this. So you're actually doing the work of leadership if you're listening to this and thinking about, how can I apply these principles in my life, in my work?
Amazing. It's probably going to sound like a repeat question, but what is the behavior that we can take away from now and begin to show up differently because of the amazing wisdom you've shared? What is the one thing you would want us to start doing in cultivation of being more self-aware leaders or being a cautious leader? I think I want to call it that. Like in becoming a cautious leader, what would be the practical things that we can begin to do today to move closer to that leader that we know we can be now that we have the how?
So, I mean, the self-awareness, like you said, is critical. But another thing is to think about the leadership you've seen practiced.
Mm.
And we don't do this enough. What have your bosses done? What have other, who do you admire as a leader? Who do you dislike as a leader? Think about that, right?
Mm.
If there's something that you admire in a leader, figure out what that is and do that. If there's something you dislike in a leader or a boss,
Mm.
don't do that. All too often, people just repeat what they've seen, even when it's bad, even when they hate it. They do the same thing. Now, I'll caution you, don't just do the opposite of what they do. Okay. It's usually a little more complex. Sometimes it's the opposite. If they're yelling, don't yell. Okay. That's easy. But, if they're, whatever it is that they're doing, it isn't necessarily the opposite that is the proper behavior. It might be something else altogether, and you need to think it through. So think about these things. That's part of that conscious leadership. That's part of that intentional leadership, thinking the stuff through, constantly thinking about it. It's always a good idea to write on this as well. You write down keep a journal, write down your ideas, give presentations, write a blog, put stuff on LinkedIn, whatever it is, comment on other people's writing. I do this all the time. I go on LinkedIn and I look at other people who write on leadership and I comment on what they're saying and I learn from that and it reinforces what I already know and I learn new things.
Would you like to touch on how you support people, like the containers you have right now on how you support people? And I also do want to talk about the book that is upcoming.
So my main thing right now is trying to get on stages and speak to people. So I get up and I talk about the 4 C's of leadership. I talk about engagement. I also talk about a concept we didn't talk about, which is how every teaching challenge is a leadership challenge. There's no real difference between teaching and leadership. There really is no difference. It's just a matter of job title. They're literally the same skills, the same behaviors, the same actions, the same pitfalls, exactly the same. And so that's one thing I do. Another thing I do is I coach. So I work with young managers who want to up their leadership game. I try to get them while they're young because they're not broken yet. I mean, I'll work with anyone who's open, but I find that a lot of people really aren't open to change when they get more advanced. But if you're advanced and you're open to change, give me a call. And the other thing I do is occasionally I do some consultancy work. So for instance, I worked, I partnered up with a couple of people and we worked with a school to help their managers engage with the faculty and help their faculty have a better understanding of the culture of the institution. So those are 3 things I do. And then the other thing I do is I write a lot. So like I said, I write an essay every week. I post it as a blog post on Substack. I also post it as a podcast, which you can access through any podcast platform. And it's called On Learning on Leading with Greatness. And it is pretty pithy podcast. And I have about 200 of these essays and I'm now compiling them into a book.
That's clever. So you have a blog, you've been producing periodically, and then every blog is a spoken or video podcast. And now you're getting this and you're turning into a book. Like, aren't you the expert for repurposing here? And meanwhile, you haven't been so big on social media.
I do a lot on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
So I post a lot on LinkedIn. I comment on people. I post my blog there as well. I have a newsletter there. That's my blog. I do a weekly. I have a weekly reflection that I write on every week. It's separate from the blog altogether. And I do a lot of interacting with other leadership thinkers who I admire.
I love how you've nicely repurposed everything you do, from a blog to a podcast to a LinkedIn post to, like, you're not wasting anything you're doing, which is really clever and a hard concept to explain to people who think they have to create content for all social media. It's just one piece. The thought is the same. but maybe the repurposing looks different on different platforms. And I really love how you're doing this. What is the best way, though, to take the next step into your world? Where do you want us to go, like immediately, if we feel like, oh, I want to dive in and see how you can help me?
Yeah, the best thing to do is go to my website. My company is Guidance for Greatness, and it is guidance for greatness, all one word, .com. So go to guidanceforgreatness.com, and you can access, I have a free resource there that you can access that I call the Transform to Greatness Toolkit. You can also just go right to that. We have a landing page, and it's the Great Leadership Toolkit.com, the Great Leadership Toolkit, all one word, with the word the Great Leadership Toolkit.com. I also have my Substack, which is Jim Salvucci, Salvucci at substack.com. And it's called On Leading with Greatness. And I also post that on LinkedIn, like I said, as a newsletter. So you can find me on LinkedIn. That's Salvucci. So those are several ways you can access what I'm doing, what I'm thinking. And then, as I said, I'm working on a book. I'm hoping that'll come out in a few months. And the book is a series. I've just selected essays from my writing, and I have enough for about 4 or 5 books, but which I will actually release as 4 or 5 books, I think. But right now I'm working on putting together in a way where you can look at the book, you can read it cover to cover, and there'll be an overarching argument, right? You'll see the logical flow of what I do, because I'm an English professor, so I'm very good at that. And also, if you just want, you can open the book at any page and read an essay.
Oh.
And it's just there. It's self-contained, because that's how they were originally written. So the book will have two modes of approaching it. So it'll be very helpful to people. If you just want to look up, like I have a concept called radical transparency. Want to learn about radical transparency? Read the essay on that.
Therefore, the title doctor is written and written, and now I see why you're a doctor. The logical flow and the essays and taking us to one chapter and saying, yep, that's the chapter, get it, go. I love that. And to your point, you could help everyone, but really the best person you can empower now is a young manager who can empower the next generation. That's what you can do, is to empower the next generation. And hopefully by the time we are 1, 2, 3 generations in, this boss mentality has, dissolved. Same applies to me. My message could help everyone. But really, if you don't feel the calling on your name, if you haven't answered the calling on your name, there's no point.
Right.
So first, they have to know their purpose. What is the calling on their name? It has to be clear, because it's always clear. And you have to say yes. Only when you say yes can this platform help you, because this platform is the how after you say yes. But if you're still battling and you're still running after money and you haven't said yes, the calling on your heart, this platform doesn't help you. Because I'm not helping you make 10K a day. We're just helping you with the how to get out of your own way and step into the calling that is on your name. And so, to Jim's point, the best person he can help is a young manager who is open to change and has a young mind and doesn't have a lot of paradigm and conditioning that is stopping them from seeing the possibility. But you could also be a savvy manager who just has worked on that conditioning reprogramming, and you just understand that nothing is in cut stone and you're open to new ways of doing things. And so I think his audience is more of a mindset than anything at this point. Jim, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. What would be your final words of wisdom?
I'll go back to my basic. Just be a decent person. Start there. That will, be a decent person as best you can across the board. It's an evolving concept. It's not as easy as just doing one thing, but just be a decent person in your life, and you will be at the beginning of becoming a great leader. That will get you started.
It starts.
Work on that.
It starts with you. Wow. As always, the best gift you can give me, the calling on my heart, and Jim's message is to identify one young manager that is ready for this message and it could change their life, their career, how they show up as a person, and what they can do in the world. So scan around you. Who do you know that is a young manager with a lot of potential and that could use this to just accelerate their journey and just do all this the other way around? Who do you know that you want to see at the top of the ladder of success? Who do you know that just got promoted to being a manager and you just feel they are too young and they're full of potential? Who do you know that is optimistic? Who do you know that is ambitious and they have just got this good promotion and they're stepping in and trying to figure out how to be the best they can? Who do you know that is always looking for leadership books? Who do you know that is curious and always learning and growing in this leadership style? This is the episode that you can share with them. Not on your socials, not the whole world. One person in their WhatsApp, in their message, in their private space, saying, I saw this interview and I thought about you. Just invite them in and have them watch this, because each of these speakers that comes in is coming because they have a how wrapped around their soul. And this podcast exists because there is someone in the world crying for that how. And what you can do is either grab the how or be the vessel to the person that is meant to receive this message. There's no speaker who is coming here by mistake. Every speaker that is coming here, that is because there's a cry around the thing they do, and you can be the transmitter. That's always going to be the biggest thing you can do to support this work, sharing the message. Subscribing is a big one, because the bigger the community, the more or the better speakers I can bring. Following, commenting, reviewing, whatever the platform allows you to do, please do those things. They help more than you can imagine. As always, appreciate you for taking the time to become better, to grow yourself in whatever way you can. I can't take your attendance for granted, so I am grateful that you spent your time with us. I hope you'll have an amazing rest of your day, and I will see you soon in another episode. That is it, my friend. To listen to more exclusive interviews like this one, simply go to the World's Best Kept Secret podcast.com and select interviews based on preferred topic.